Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be reading Psalm 4, A Prayer in the Night. The psalm opens up with a superscription for the choir director on stringed instruments, the Psalm of David. Notice that term, the choir director. Lamnat secha is the Hebrew. The la prefix, of course, that's the preposition. And so the translation here, two, I guess we could say two or four. Notice I put the director. Well, you say, well, what happened to the choir? I think the choir is in the context. Notice it's talking about stringed instruments, and so I'm not arguing against the context, but the word choir isn't actually there. It's the director, and the context tells us that it's the director of music, of instruments, of singing, and things like that. And notice the term stringed instruments. Uh, being genoth, the oath is plural. That's feminine plural, and the root word there, nagan, is the term that refers to sort of plucking, like you do with the strings, plucking, strumming. So it's a musical term. And the idea here is that these are musical instruments. Of course, here we've got a picture. Now, this is from um, the standard of Ur. So this is 1,000 years before David that this engraving was made, showing musical instruments of that day. I don't think they changed that much by the time you get to David's day. Um, and so this psalm, as well as a number of others, are meant. They're meant to be sung. In fact, we get that when first of all, we see it with this choir director, the strings instruments, even from the term when we read that this is a psalm of David, and that term psalm, a mismor. And zamar is again this same idea of plucking or strumming, the hitting of the strings. And so it involves the making of music. Now, when we talk about the Psalms, we don't always think immediately of music, but we should, because this is the hymn book of the scriptures. And notice this is a psalm of David. Does he write it or is it dedicated to him? I'm going to take him as the author. I'm just going to assume that. And that's a superscription. The term, by the way, psalm, that's actually a Greek word. Here we have it up here, psalmos, and it means the same idea. It means music, that which is strummed, or it's sort of the making of music. And so when we refer to the Psalms, we're actually using a Greek word that means that refers to it as music. It references the music. So what we've been looking at then is the superscription, but now we come to the psalm itself, and notice the verbs. Answer me when I call. This is by way of supplication that's being made, where the psalmist is speaking to God. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. So he's calling for God to answer, to hear what he's praying, and then to respond. Notice the title for God that is used here, O God of my righteousness. That's been rendered a few different ways by some of the newer translations. The New International Version says, My righteous God. I don't think that's the best rendering of this. I think I would think the New American Standard is a bit better. The New English translation has it, O God who vindicates me, which is following along, I think, in the path of the New American Standard. God of my righteousness. In other words, he's the one who does that. Or the Old Revised Standard Version, "O God of my right." Technically, that's probably even more accurate. But you can see righteousness and right; it's really speaking of the same thing. So both the New American Standard and the King James, "O God of my righteousness," and I think that has the idea God not only deals with us righteously, but He is. Can I suggest that He's the source of our righteousness? That He not just vindicates us. I'm going to go New Testament here. He declares us to be righteous. He justifies us. We find our righteousness in Him. The psalm continues, verse 2, O sons of men, how long will my honor become a reproach? Notice he was speaking to God, but now he speaks, sort of generally out there, sons of men, how long will my honor become a reproach? How long will you love what is worthless and aim at deception? Um, and so notice there's God and the righteousness that he gives, and then by contrast, there's that which is followed by the sons of men who love what's worthless, who aim at deception, and notice there's a crescendo there, the Selah. And so this is asking what we could really take to be a rhetorical question. It's not really going to have an answer to it. But he's asking how long, and then our translation notice repeats again how long, although it puts it in italics. That's the translator's way of telling you they're adding that, but the idea is still there. How long will my honor become a reproach? And also, will, the same idea, same how long will you love what is worthless and aim at deception? That's what people do as opposed to what God's people do and what God calls us to do. And so, verse 3, but know that the Lord has set apart the godly man for himself. The Lord hears when I call. Remember, there's a call to hear, and now we find out that the faith in that call is affirmed. The Lord hears when I call to him. Verse 4, tremble and do not sin. Now, that term tremble, that's also been translated a variety of ways. The Hebrew uh, rigzu, it's a cal imperative, masculine plural, and that's the u part is the plural of ragaz, and it has the idea trembling works. Although Genesis chapter 45, verse 24, takes that same term, and this is Jacob speaking to his sons, probably knowing the way they were. He says, don't quarrel. Notice that same term is translated quarrel there. So trembling maybe with anger or with sort of conflict. In that context, it's not how it always has. It doesn't always carry that same idea. 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 15, were the raiders, those Philistines who had entered the land. They trembled, and in this case, when when suddenly they're being defeated, David is winning a victory. I'm sorry, Jonathan, I should say, not David. David's not around yet. Jonathan's winning a victory. Or Psalm 77:18, where the earth trembled and shook, and so you could translate it literally. Trembled actually works. Um, Although Proverb 29:9 carries that same idea. Remember trembling. The foolish man either rages or laughs. Notice that trembling with anger, with conflict, and so the term can have the idea of conflict there. It doesn't have to have that idea, but sometimes that goes with that. So the translators in this case wanted to be sort of neutral. They didn't want to take a stance, so they just said, "Tremble." You can take that whichever way you want, and do not sin. Now, when we look at the Septuagint, that's the Greek translation of the same passage. The Greek Septuagint has that term orgizesse. That orgeo is the word to be angry or wrathful, have wrath or have anger. Kai me harmar tanete. That is and do not sin. Our old friend harmatio for sin. Um, but notice the Greek translation it's not neutral. It has the idea of anger put in here. When we get to the New Testament, Ephesians chapter 4, verses 26 and 27, I would suggest Paul's actually quoting this passage when he says, and he's using the same orge term that was found in the Septuagint, be angry and yet do not sin. Notice tremble and do not sin. Be angry and yet do not sin. And then he continues, and I think what he's doing, he's paraphrasing the rest of the verse. The rest of the verse is meditate in your heart upon your bed and be still. He says, he paraphrases that, do not let the sun go down on your anger. You see, it's really sort of saying the same thing. And then he adds by way of, not paraphrase, but now by way of application, and do not give the devil an opportunity. And so Now, some translations have rendered that instead of be angry, in your anger, don't sin. That's okay. It's not necessarily saying that you have to tremble, that you have to have that sort of thing. But if you have that response, and remember, trembling could be with anger, or trembling could be with fear, or just in trepidation, in whatever it is, whatever form it takes, do not sin. And then he continues. He continues. Notice the faith is enacted. Meditate in your heart upon your bed and be still. And then Selah, again, that's the crescendo, the pause. We're going to pause for a moment and think about what that looks like as you meditate upon your bed and are still and let the worries, the problems, yes, maybe the anger, but all those things go by the wayside. Verse 5, offer the sacrifices of righteousness and trust in the Lord. Now, notice how we started back in verse 1. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Now we see the call, offer those sacrifices of righteousness. And as you do that, not that that's not that is in contrast with it, but offer the sacrifices of righteousness and trust in the Lord. So what we have there is a call to faith. And then verse 6 is the voice of unbelief. Many are saying, who will show us any good? Notice there's two voices. One is a call to faith. The other is, well, what good is that going to do? And then last part of verse 6, here is the prayer of faith. Lift up the light of your countenance upon us, O Lord. So who's going to show us any good? You show us what's good. You lift up the light of your, now our translation says your countenance, actually lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. Verse 7, you have put gladness in my heart more than when their grain and new wine abound. Notice how faith is being affirmed. And verse 8, in peace I will both lie down. Remember how we said this is a going to bed psalm. from the bed, we made that pronouncement. But in peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. So we have that going to bed idea that we saw back in verse 4, meditate in your heart upon your bed and be still. Now, as he goes to sleep, and this is why I call this the going to bed psalm, as he goes to sleep, in peace I will both lie down and sleep. Sort of reminds me of that childhood prayer that we learned. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. And I think you can still pray that prayer. And that reflects this psalm. But now notice verse 8, in the latter part of verse 8, for you alone, Lord, make me to dwell in safety. And as we look at that term safety, batak is the Hebrew term. Now that's the noun. If we look at the verb form, batak, almost pronounced the same way. That's actually one of the words that can be translated meaning to trust. It's actually several words, just like in English. You can talk about trust and belief and faith. Same thing in Hebrew. Um, but notice, you alone, Lord, make me to dwell in safety. Think about what safety is. It's that place where you can trust. So I'm not arguing with the translation. I'm just saying that safety has that idea of being able to trust. And we find out here that the Lord is the one who causes us to trust in him. Can we say it this way? The Lord brings faith. The Lord instills faith within us because of who he is, but also because of what he does.